I am accidentally hitting because it's such a close to the edge of my screen. I keep hitting the go live button. So please give me a few minutes. I'm going to have to top up my tea and find the page. Here we go. Over here, over here. Give me 1 second. Uh-oh, I'm on the wrong thing here. Okay. Hi, I'll be with you guys. Give me 5 minutes, okay? I meant to go live at 8:30 for starters, and then I hit the live. I set it at 8 o'clock by accident. 8 o'clock, and now I have to go and get a cup of tea, and because I don't have enough tea in this cup to do 3 chapters. So I'll say hi to everybody when you get in here. I'm gonna go and do some stuff. I gotta go get a cup of tea, use the loo, turn the heat on, make sure the wood is in the fire. Ooh. Oh, I'm stiff today. I just need to get a cup of tea. Not sure she likes this new food. It could just be all the shortbread she's been eating. Here I go. Are you coming in? You're not getting nothing. Dopey Me gave her these dog stick treats, and they gave her gas, which was fine, but it was stinky gas. And then all of a sudden, I realized that these can be broken up into bits. She doesn't need the whole stick. So she's going to be bugging me. There, one. Now go lay down. Alrighty. She loves shortbread. She's been under my feet all day. Now, folks, I do apologize. I found out that last week's... Gotta take a breath here. Last week's live reading, the sound was cutting in and out. Is my sound okay now? I need to know that. Guess I'll be cutting by hand. Thank you for your response. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Yeah, I'm going to take my time, honey. So, I'm going to do my best to reread chapter 6 and then chapter 7. I don't know if I'm going to make it to chapter 8 tonight, but I am going to do my best. All right, I got to move you guys back a little bit so I can move my... Gracie, you're not getting anything else. Okay. Chin chin. Pip pip. Cutting dried apricots with a food processor. Why? Oh, Rebecca, thank you for my tea. Yeah, I'm a mess. I'm a mess. But guess what? Saturday, other than my daily live stream, I'm not doing nothing. Okay. Chapter 6. I've already deleted it from last week's. Beth finds the palace beautiful. The big house did prove a palace beautiful, though it took some time for all to get in, and Beth found it very hard to pass the lions. Old Mr. Lawrence was the biggest one. Do I have the right glasses on for this? Use scissors, Beth. But after he had called and said something funny or kind to each one of the girls and talked over old times with their mother, I'm sorry, takes me a second. And after talking over old times with their mother, nobody felt much afraid of him, except timid Beth. The other line was the fact that they were poor and Laurie rich, for this made them shy of accepting favors which they could not return. But after a while, they found that he considered them the best benefactors and could not do enough to show how grateful he was for Mrs. March's motherly welcome, their cheerful society, and the comfort he took in that humble home of theirs. So they soon forgot their pride and interchanged kindnesses without stopping to think which was the greater. All sorts of pleasant things happened about that time, for the new friendship flourished like grass in spring. Everyone liked Laurie, and he privately informed his tutor that the Marches were regularly splendid girls. With the delightful enthusiasm of youth, they took the solitary boy into their midst and made much of him, and he found something very charming in the innocent companionship of these simple-hearted girls. Never having known a mother or sisters, he was quick to feel the influences they brought about him, and their busy, lively ways made him ashamed of the indolent life he led. He was tired of books and found people so interesting now that Mr. Brooke was obliged to make a very unsatisfactory reports, for Laurie was always playing truant and running over to the Marches. Never mind. Let him take a holiday and make it up afterwards, said the old gentleman. That good lady next door says he's studying too hard and needs young society, amusement, and exercise. I suspect she's right, and that I've been coddling the fellow, and if I'd been a grandmother. Let him do what he likes as long as he's happy. He can't get into mischief in that little nunnery over there, and Mrs. March is doing more for him than we can. What good times they had, to be sure. Such plays and tableaux, such sleigh rides and skating frolics, and such pleasant evenings in the old parlor. And now and then such gay little parties at the great house. Meg could walk in the conservatory whenever she liked and revel in bouquets. Jo browsed over the whole new library voraciously and convulsed the old gentleman with her criticisms. Amy, Gracie, please. Go lay down. Amy copied pictures and enjoyed beauty to her heart's content, and Laurie played Lord of the Manor in the most delightful style. But Beth, though yearning for the grand piano, could not pluck up the courage to go to the mansion of bliss, as Meg called it. She went once with Jo, but the old gentleman, not having been aware of her infirmity, stared at her so hard from under his heavy eyebrows and said, "Hey!" so loud that he frightened her so much her feet chattered on the floor. She told her mother and she ran away, declaring she would never go back there any more, not even for the dear piano. No persuasions or enticements could overcome her fear, till, the fact coming to Mr. Lawrence's ear in some mysterious way, he set about mending matters. I bet it was Jo, eh? During one of the brief calls he made, he artfully led the conversation to music, and talked away about the great singers whom he had seen, fine organs he had heard, and told such charming anecdotes that Beth found it impossible to stay in her distant corner, but crept nearer and nearer as if fascinated. At the back of his chair she stopped and stood listening, with her great eyes wide open and her cheeks red with excitement of this unusual performance. Taking no more notice of her than if she'd been a fly, Mr. Lawrence talked on about Laurie's lessons and teachers, and presently, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to Mrs. March, "The boy neglects his music now, and I'm glad of it, for he was getting too fond of it. But the piano suffers for want of use. Wouldn't some of your girls like to run over and practice on it now and then, just to keep it in tune, you know, ma'am?" Beth took a step forward and pressed her hands tightly together to keep from clapping them, for this was an irresistible temptation, and the thought of practicing on that splendid instrument quite took her breath away. Before Mrs. March could reply, Mr. Lawrence went on with an odd little nod and smile. "They needn't see or speak to anyone, but run in at any time, for I'm shut up in my study at the other end of the house. Laurie's out a great deal, and the servants are never near the drawing-room after 9 o'clock. Here he rose as if going, and Beth made up her mind to speak, for that last arrangement left nothing to be desired. "Please tell the young ladies what I say, and if they don't care to come, why, never mind." Here a little hand slipped into his, and Beth looked up at him with a face full of gratitude as she said in her earnest yet timid way, "Oh, sir, they do care very, very much." "Are you the musical girl?" he asked without any startling "Hey!" as he looked down at her very kindly. "I'm Beth. And I'd love it dearly, and I'll come if you're quite sure nobody will hear me and be disturbed," she added, fearing to be rude and trembling at her own boldness as she spoke. "Not a soul, my dear. The house is empty half the day, so come and drum away as you like, and I shall be obliged to you." "How kind you are, sir." Beth blushed like a rose under the friendly look he wore, but she was not frightened now, and gave the big hand a grateful squeeze, because she had no words to thank him for the precious gift he had given her. The old gentleman softly stroked the hair off her forehead, and stooping down, kissed her, saying in a tone very few people had ever heard, "I had a little girl once. with eyes like these, bless you, my dear. Good day, madame. And he went away in a great hurry because his eyes were watering, I'm sure. Beth had a rapture with her mother and then rushed to impart the glorious news to her family of invalids, as the girls were not at home. How blithely she sang that evening, and how they all laughed at her because she woke Amy in the night playing piano on her face in her sleep. Next day, having been told the old and young gentlemen were out of the house, Beth, after 2 or 3 retreats, fairly got in the side door and made her way as noiselessly as any mouse to the drawing room, where her idol stood. Quite by accident, of course. Some pretty easy music lay on the piano, and with trembling fingers and frequent stops to listen and look about, Beth at last touched the great instrument and straightway forgot her fear, herself, and everything else but the unspeakable delight which the music gave her, for it was like the voice of a beloved friend. She stayed till Hannah came to take her home to dinner, but she had no appetite and could only sit and smile upon everyone in a general state of beatitude. After that, the little brown hood slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing room was haunted by a tuneful spirit. That came and went unseen. She never knew that Mr. Lawrence often opened his study door to hear the old-fashioned airs he liked. She never saw Laurie mount guard in the hall to warn the servants away. She never suspected that the exercise books and new songs which she found in the rack were put there for her especial benefit. And when he talked to her about music at home, she only thought how kind he was to tell things that helped her so much. So she enjoyed herself heartily and found, what isn't always the case, that her granted wish was all she had hoped. Perhaps it was because she was so grateful for this blessing and a greater given that Perhaps it was because she was so grateful for this blessing that a greater was given her. At any rate, she deserved both. Mother, I'm going to work Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. He's so kind to me. I must thank him, and I don't know any other way. Can I do it? Asked Beth a few weeks after that eventful call of his. Yes, dear. It will please him very much, and it'll be a nice way of thanking him. The girls will help you about them, and I will pay for the making up. Which, in other words, I think she would pay for the fabric and stuff for it to be made up with. Replied Mrs. March, who took particular pleasure in granting Beth's request because she so seldom asked for anything for herself. Now, is the noise? Am I still here, guys? Because it was, the sound was cutting in and out. Lori, I got your parcel. Thank you. And I got Rebecca's too. Thank you very much. Okay. After many serious discussions with Meg and Joe, the pattern was chosen, the materials bought, and the slippers begun. A cluster of grave yet cheerful pansies on a deeper purple background was pronounced very appropriate and pretty, and Beth worked away early and late with occasional lifts over hard parts. She was a nimble little needlewoman. Say that fast quick. She was a little nimble needlewoman, and they were finished before anyone had got tired of them. Then she wrote a very short, simple note, and with Laurie's help, got them smuggled onto the study table one morning before the gentleman was up. When this excitement was over, Beth waited to see what would happen. All that day passed, and a part of the next, before any acknowledgement arrived, and she was beginning to fear she had offended her crotchety friend. On the afternoon of the second day, she went out to do an errand and give poor Joanna, the invalid doll, her daily exercise. As she came up the street on her return, she saw 3, yes, 4 heads popping in and out of the parlor windows. And the moment they saw her, several hands were waved and several joyful voices screamed, Here's a letter from the old gentleman. Come quick and read it. Oh, Beth, he sent you, began Amy, gesticulating with unseemly energy. But she got no further, for Joe quenched her by slamming down the window. Beth hurried on in a flutter of suspense. At the door, her sisters seized her and bore her into the parlor with triumphal procession, all pointing and saying at once, Look there! Look there! Beth did look, and turned pale with delight and surprise. For there stood a little cabinet piano with a letter lying on the glossy lid, directed, like a signboard, to Miss Elizabeth March. For me? Gasped Beth, holding on to Joe and feeling as if she should tumble down. It was such an overwhelming thing altogether. Yes, all for you, my precious. Isn't it splendid of him? Don't you think he's the dearest old man in the world? Here's the key in the letter. We didn't open it, but we're dying to know what he says, cried Joe, hugging her little sister and offering the note. You read it. I can't. I feel so queer. Oh, it's too lovely. And Beth hid her face in Joe's apron while quite upset by her present. Joe opened the paper and began to laugh, for the first words she saw were, Miss March, dear madam. How nice it sounds. I wish someone would write to me so, said Amy, who thought the old-fashioned address very elegant. I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I've never had any that suited me so well as yours, continued Joe. Heartsease, which is the other name for pansies. Heartsease is my favorite flower, and these will always remind me of the gentle giver. I like to pay my debts, so I know you will allow the old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes, I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. Hey, Corey, I'm glad you're home, honey. There, Beth. That's an honor to be proud of, I'm sure. Laurie told me how fond Mr. Lawrence used to be of the child who died, and how he kept all her little things carefully. Just think, he's given you her piano. That comes from having big blue eyes and loving music, said Joe, trying to soothe Beth, who trembled and looked more excited than she had ever been before. See the cunning brackets to hold the candles, and the nice green silk puckered up with a gold rose in the middle, and the pretty rack and stool, all complete, added Meg, opening the instrument and displaying its beauties. Your humble servant, James Lawrence. Only think of his writing that to you. I'll tell the girls. They'll think it's splendid, said Amy, much impressed by the note. Try it, honey. Let's hear the sound of the baby piano, said Hannah, who always took share in the family's joys and sorrows. So Beth tried it, and everyone pronounced it the most remarkable piano ever heard. It had evidently been newly tuned and put in apple pie order, but perfect as it was, I think the real charm of it lay in the happiest of all faces which leaned over it, as Beth lovingly touched the beautiful black and white keys and pressed the bright pedals. You'll have to go and thank him, said Joe, by way of a joke, for the idea of the child really going never entered her head. Yes, I mean to. I guess I'll go now, before I get frightened thinking about it. And to the utter amazement of the assembled family, Beth walked deliberately down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrence's door. Well, I wish I may die if it ain't the queerest thing I ever see. The peony has turned her head. She'd never have gone in her right mind, cried Hannah, staring after her, while the girls were rendered quite speechless by the miracle. They would have been even more amazed. They would have been even more amazed if they had seen what Beth did afterwards. If you'll believe me, She went and knocked at the study door before she gave herself time to think. And when the gruff voice called out, "Come in," she did go in, right up to Mr. Lawrence, who looked quite taken aback and held out her hand, saying, with only a small quaver in her voice, "I came to thank you, sir, for—" But she didn't finish, for he looked so friendly that she forgot her speech, and only remembering that he had lost the little girl he loved, she put both arms around his neck and kissed him. If the roof of the house had suddenly flown off, the old gentleman wouldn't have been more astonished. But he liked it. Oh dear, yes, he liked it amazingly. And was so touched and pleased that by that confiding little kiss, that all his crustiness vanished. And he just set her on his knee and laid his wrinkled cheek against her rosy one, feeling if he had got his own little granddaughter back again. Beth ceased to fear him from that moment, and they all sat there talking to him as cozily as if she had known him all her life. For love casts out fear, and gratitude can conquer pride. When she went home, he walked with her to her own gate, shook hands cordially, and then touched his hat and marched back again, looking very stately and erect, like a handsome, soldierly old gentleman as he was. When the girls saw that performance, Jo began to dance a jig by way of expressing her satisfaction. Amy nearly fell out the window in her surprise, and Meg exclaimed with uplifted hands, "Well, I do believe the world is coming to an end." How's everybody doing? Oh. All right. Chapter 7. Excuse me. Chapter 7, Amy's Valley of Humiliation. Thank you, Linda. "That boy is a perfect cyclops, isn't he?" said Amy one day as Laurie clattered by on horseback with a flourish of his whip as he passed. "How dare you say so when he's got both eyes? And very handsome ones they are, too," cried Jo, who resented any slighting remarks about her friend. "I didn't say anything about his eyes, and I don't see why you need to get fired up when I admire his riding." "Oh, my goodness, that little goose means a centaur. She called him a cyclops," exclaimed Jo with a burst of laughter. "You needn't be so rude. It was only a lapse of linguae, as Mr. Davis says," retorted Amy, finishing Jo with her Latin. I just wish I had a little of the money Laurie spends on that horse," she added, as if to herself, yet hoping her sisters would hear. "Why?" asked Meg, for Jo had gone off in another laugh at Amy's second blunder. "I need it so much. I'm dreadfully in debt, and it won't be my turn to have the rag money for a month." "In debt, Amy? What do you mean?" Meg looked sober. "Why, I owe at least a dozen pickled limes, and I can't pay them, you know, till I have money, for Marmee forbade me having anything charged at the shop." Now remember, Beth is Jo's little girl, sort of, and Amy and Meg. Meg is more, looks after Amy, kind of like they're mothering, Little Women things. "Tell me about it. Are the limes the fashion now? It used to be pricking bits of rubber to make balls." Meg tried to keep her countenance. Amy looked so grave and important. "Why, you see, the girls are always buying them. Unless you want to be thought mean, you must do it too. It's nothing but limes now, for everyone is sucking them in their desks in school time and trading them off for pencils and bead rings, paper dolls, or something else at recess. If one girl likes another, she gives her a lime. If she's mad with her, she eats one before her face, and don't offer her even a suck. They treat by turns, and I've had ever so many, but I haven't returned them. And I ought to for their debts of honor, you know. How much will pay them off and restore your credit? Asked Meg, taking out her purse. A quarter would more than do it, and leave a few cents for a treat for you. Don't you like limes? Not much. You may have my share. Here's the money. Make it last as long as you can, for it isn't very plenty, you know. Oh, thank you. It must be so nice to have pocket money. I'll have a grand feast, for I haven't tasted a lime this week. I felt delicate about taking any as I couldn't return them, and I'm actually suffering for one. Next day, Amy was rather late at school, but could not resist the temptation of displaying with pardonable pride a moist brown paper parcel before she consigned it to the innermost recesses of her desk. During the next few minutes, the rumor that Amy March had got 24 delicious limes, she ate one on the way, and was going to treat circulated through her set, and the attentions of her friends became quite overwhelming. Katie Brown invited her to her next party on the spot. Mary Kingsley insisted on lending her watch till recess, and Jenny Snow, a satirical young lady who had basely twitted Amy upon her limeless state, promptly parried the hatchet, and offered to furnish answers to certain appalling sums. But Amy had not forgotten Miss Snow's cutting remarks about some persons whose noses were not too flat to smell other people's limes, and stuck-up people who were too proud to ask for them, and instantly crushed the Snow girl's hopes by the withering telegram, "You needn't be so polite all of a sudden, for you won't get any." A distinguished personage happened to visit the school that morning, and Amy's beautifully drawn maps received praise, which honor to her foe rankled in the soul of Miss Snow, and caused Miss March to assume the airs of a studious young peacock. But alas, alas, pride goes before a fall, and the revengeful Snow turned the tables with disastrous success. No sooner had the guest paid the usual stale compliments and bowed himself out than Jenny, under the pretense of asking an important question, informed Mr. Davis, the teacher, that Amy March had pickled limes in her desk. A nasty girl. But Amy, you know what? Amy was rude. She could have forgiven, right? Now Mr. Davis had declared limes were a contraband article, and solemnly vowed to publicly ferule the first person who was found breaking the law. This much enduring man had succeeded in banishing chewing gum after a long and stormy war, had made a bonfire of the confiscated novels and newspapers, had suppressed a private post office, and had forbidden distortions of the face, nicknames, and caricatures, all that one man could do to keep 100 rebellious girls in order. Boys are trying enough to human patience, goodness knows, but girls are infinitely more so, especially to a nervous gentleman with tyrannical tempers and no more talent for teaching than Dr. Blymer. Mr. Davis knew any quantity of Greek, Latin, algebra, and ologies of all sorts, so he was called a fine teacher, and manners, morals, feelings, and examples were not considered of any particular importance. It was a most unfortunate moment for denouncing Amy, and Jenny knew it. Mr. Davis had evidently taken his coffee too strong that morning, and there was an east wind, which always affected his neuralgia, and his pupils had not done him the credit which he had deserved. Therefore, to use the expressive, if not elegant language of a schoolgirl, he was nervous as a witch and as cross as a bear. The word limes was like fire to powder. His yellow face flushed, and he rapped on his desk with energy which made Jenny skip to her seat with unusual rapidity. "Young ladies, attention if you please." At the stern order, the buzz ceased, and 50 pairs of blue, black, gray, and brown eyes were obediently fixed upon his awful countenance. "Miss March, come to my desk, please. Oh, no, come to my desk." Amy rose to comply with outward composure, but a secret fear oppressed her, for the limes weighed upon her conscience. Bring with you the limes you have in your desk, was the unexpected command which arrested her before she got out of her seat. Don't take all, whispered her neighbor, a young lady of great presence of mind. Amy hastily shook out a half a dozen and laid the rest down before Mr. Davis, feeling that any man possessing a human heart would relent when that delicious perfume met his nose. Unfortunately, Mr. Davis particularly detested the odor of the fashionable pickle, and disgust was added to his wrath. Is that all? Not quite, stammered Amy. Bring the rest immediately. With a despairing glance at her set, she obeyed. You are sure there are no more? I never lie, sir. So I see. Now take these disgusting things 2 by 2 and throw them out the window. There was a simultaneous sigh which created quite a little gust as the last hope fled and the treat was ravished from their longing lips. Scarlet with shame and anger, Amy went to and fro 6 dreadful times, and as each doomed couple, looking, oh, so plump and juicy, fell from her reluctant hands, a shout from the street completed the anguish of the girls, for it told them that their feast was being exulted over by little Irish children who were their sworn foes. This was too much. All flashed indignant or appealing glances at the inexorable Davis, and one passionate lime lover burst into tears. As Amy returned from her last trip, Mr. Davis made a portentous hem and said in his most impressive manner, Young ladies, you remember what I said to you a week ago. I'm sorry this has happened, but I never allow my rules to be infringed, and I never break my word. Miss March, hold out your hand. Amy started and put both hands behind her, turning on him an imploring look which pleaded for the better, and that the words she could pleaded for her better than the words she could not utter. She was rather a favorite with old Davis, as of course he was called, and it's my private belief that he would have broken his word of the indignation of one irrepressible young lady had not found vent in a hiss. The hiss, as faint as it was, irritated the rascal old gentleman and sealed the culprit's fate. Your hand, Miss March. The only answer her mute appeal received, and too proud to cry or beseech, Amy set her teeth, threw back her head defiantly, and bore without flinching several stinging blows on her little palm. They were neither many nor heavy, but that made no difference to her. For the first time in her life she had been struck, and the disgrace in her eyes was as deep as if he had knocked her down. You will now stand on the platform till recess, said Mr. Davis, resolved to do the thing thoroughly since he had begun. That was dreadful. It would have been bad enough to go to her own seat and see the pitying faces of her friends or the satisfied ones of her few enemies. But to face the whole school with that shame fresh upon her seemed impossible. And for a second, she felt as if she could only drop down where she stood and break her heart with crying. A bitter sense of wrong and the thought of Jenny Snow helped her to bear it. And taking the ignominious, I can't pronounce that, guys, ignominious place, she fixed her eyes on the stove funnel above what now seemed a sea of faces, and stood there so motionless and white that the girls found it very hard to study with that pathetic face before them. During the 15 minutes that followed, the proud and sensitive little girl suffered a shame and pain which she never forgot. To others, it might seem a ludicrous or trivial affair, but to her it was hard to experience, for during the 12 years of her life she had been governed by love alone, and a blow of that sort had never touched her before. The smart of her hand and the ache of her heart were forgotten in the sting of the thought, I shall have to tell at home, and they will all be disappointed in me. The 15 minutes seemed an hour, and when they came to an end at last, and the word recess had never been more welcome to her before. You can go, Miss March, said Mr. Davis, looking as if he felt uncomfortable. He did not soon forget the reproachful glance Amy gave him as she went without a word to anyone straight to the anteroom, snatched her things, and left the place forever, as she passionately declared. As she passionately declared to herself. She was in a sad state when she got home. When the older girls arrived some time later, an indignation meeting was held at once. Mrs. March did not say much, but looked disturbed and comforted her afflicted little daughter in her tenderest manner. Meg bathed the insulted hand with glycerin and tears. Beth felt that even her beloved kittens would fail as a balm for griefs like this. Joe wrathfully proposed that Mr. Davis should be arrested without delay, and Hannah shook her fist at the villain and pounded potatoes for dinner as if she'd had him under her pestle. Sorry, I gotta turn this heat off here. No notice was taken of Amy's flight except by her mates, but the sharp-eyed demoiselles discovered that Mr. Davis was quite benignant in the afternoon. Benignant in the afternoon. Some of the language they used back then when this book was written is beyond me. Was benignant in the afternoon, so also unusually nervous. Just before school closed, Jo appeared wearing a grim expression as she stalked up to the desk and delivered a letter from her mother, and then collected Amy's property and departed, carefully scraping the mud from her boots on the doormat, as if she shook the dust of the place off her feet. Yes, you can have a vacation from school, but I want you to study a little every day with Beth, said Mrs. March that evening. I don't approve of corporal punishment, especially for girls. I dislike Mr. Davies' manner of teaching, and I don't think the girls you associate with are doing you any good. So I shall ask your father's advice before I send you anywhere else. That's good. I wish all the girls would leave and spoil his old school. It's perfectly maddening to think of those lovely limes, sighed Amy with the air of a martyr. I'm not sorry you lost them, for you broke the rules and deserve some punishment for disobedience, was the severe reply, which rather disappointed the young lady, who expected nothing but sympathy. Do you mean you're glad I was disgraced before the whole school? Cried Amy. I should not have chosen that way of mending a fault, replied her mother. But I'm not sure that it won't do you more good than a milder method. You're getting to be rather conceited, my dear, and it is quite time you set about correcting it. You have a good many little gifts and virtues, but there is no need of parading them, for conceit spoils the finest genius. There is not much danger that real talent or goodness will be overlooked for long, even if it is. Okay, I can't quite get my tongue around that. There is not much danger that real talent or goodness will be overlooked long. Even if it is, the consciousness of possessing and using it well should satisfy one, and the great charm of all power is modesty. So it is, cried Laurie, who was playing chess in a corner with Jo. I knew a girl once who had a really remarkable talent for music, and she didn't know it. She never guessed that the sweet little things she composed when she was alone, and wouldn't have believed it if anyone had told her. I wish I'd known that nice girl. Maybe she would have helped me. I'm so stupid, said Beth, who stood beside him listening eagerly. You do know her, and she helps you better than anyone else could, answered Laurie, looking at her with a mischievous grin, with mischievous meaning in his merry black eyes. that Beth suddenly turned very red and hid her face in the sofa cushion, quite overcome by such an unexpected discovery. In other words, he basically told her, "We've been listening to you, and you're amazing, and you don't even know it." Jo let Lori win the game to pay for the praise of her Beth, who could not be prevailed upon to play for them after her compliment. So Lori did his best. Lori did his best and sang delightfully, even in a particularly lively humor, for to the Marches he seldom showed the moody side of his character. When he was gone, Amy, who had been pensive all evening, said suddenly, as if busy over some new idea, "Is Lori an accomplished boy?" Yes. Yes, he has had excellent education, has much talent. He'll make a fine man if not spoilt by petting, replied her mother. And he isn't conceited, is he? asked Amy. Not in the least. That's why he's so charming and why we all like him so much. I see. It's nice to have accomplishments and be elegant, but not to show off or get perked up, said Amy thoughtfully. These things are always seen and felt in a person's manner and conversation if modestly used. But it's not necessary to display them, said Mrs. March, any more than it's proper to wear all your bonnets and gowns and ribbons at once, that folks may know you have them, added Jo, and the lecture ended with a laugh. I think that's what I'm all I can do tonight. I'm stumbling over my words. I've had a weird day. What's today? Thursday? Maybe Saturday or Sunday. We'll get in and try and get another chapter in before Christmas. Thanks for joining me on Little Women Live. I do apologize that last week's was so choppy. And you did get your 2 chapters tonight. Only the first one was a repeat of last week. I love you guys. Take care. God bless. I'm going to go put my cookies away and go to bed. I'm beat. Just totally beat. I love you guys. I'll get better at it, Mama Dukes. I'll get better at it. I'm not very good at reading aloud, right? Especially when I'm tired, because my eyes go. Right? And I skip words by accident. So take care, everybody. Good night. God bless. Merry, happy, ho, ho.